I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Bryan, it's good to see you again. I'm not going to say much in terms of introductions, but I will say that I'm thrilled to be working with you. You're the director of McREL, probably preeminent research center in the world for education. And I don't know how many books you've written, but there's a spell there where Amazon kept showing me a new Bryan Goodwin book. Every time I open up my Kindle, it's like, do you want to get this book? Do you want to get this book? There's got to be a dozen or so at least. And the one I'm mostly interested in because of our collaboration is the new classroom instruction that works. But I'm grateful to see you. And what else can you tell people so they know who they're talking to? I know they already, you need no introduction, but what else could you say?
Well, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. And so McREL, I'm the CEO of McREL. We've been around since 1966, a long time. McREL's mission has always been basically taking research and translating it into practical applications that we like to say that help educators flourish. And when educators flourish, students flourish. And so that's always been our mission. We really focus on teaching, learning, and leading. We do a variety. We work all around the world. We've got a lot of programs across the Western Pacific and out of our Hawaii office, but then, like I said, internationally. But I also say, Jim, it feels like everywhere I go, I mention, Jim Knight and I are working on a book, and they're really excited about that because you also need no introduction. And there's so many folks that have really relied on and really sort of, I think, understood the impact cycle, your inside-out approach to coaching. And so I've been really excited about that too. So.
Well, thank you. I was going to ask you, why were you wanting to do this project? What led you to want to get involved in this?
Yeah, I think it really was the more I understood, and that when I'd known of your work, but I think I hadn't thought about a collaboration. But then when I started really getting my head into what the impact cycle is, here's what I got really excited about. I realized it is exactly, the impact cycle is really the 6-phase model of learning that we talk about for students. And we've always said, we want to expose teachers to the same experiences that we want them exposing students to. And I really think ultimately what the impact cycle is about, it's about learning in its natural state, right? That it doesn't always happen in a classroom. It often happens as we are reflecting on our practice. We set goals, we become interested in something, we focus on it for a while, then we apply it, then we kind of make sense of it. We keep practicing, we keep reflecting. And then eventually we get to this place where we start to extend it, we apply it, we connect dots, we go a step further, we integrate with what else we've been doing. And so that, I think for me, that was what was exciting. Is like, this is a way to actually apply the 6 phases by helping teachers immerse themselves in the 6 phases of learning by having a coach that can guide them through that process.
I'm so grateful for it because, I'm learning a lot. I didn't really have a clear sense of the 6 phases of learning and then how that could be integrated as kind of a starting point. What do the kids need to do to be able to learn? So I'm grateful for that. I think the big thing, the question that's driven us all the time is, how do you best go about getting evidence-based, high-quality, research-based tools in the hands of teachers in the ways that don't diminish the professionalism of teachers? Yeah. So I see this as a chance for us to really explore. And the thing is, I would say, if you diminish the professionalism of teachers by telling them what to do, it's probably not going to work. It's probably not going to be very effective. We don't just people robotically implementing. We want them to be engaged as professionals. So I'm really excited about that. I've learned so much. Wrestling with the challenges we've been wrestling with has been really, really a lot of fun. And I thought today we could just sort of talk about what have we learned and what's still to come. And it'll be a motivation for me to write those chapters I still need to write. That's kind of part of it. What's in the background too. So what would you say you've learned in this process? What's been interesting to you?
I think what's been interesting is thinking about, we're going this kind of step further. There's obviously like, what do these practices look like in the classroom? But then the idea of saying to teachers, there's so many things I've learned. But here's one, right? Saying to teachers like, okay, what's different for your kids though? If you do this, what's going to happen? And all really kind of engaging teachers in their own action research, or it doesn't have to be that elaborate, but just the idea of I've tried something, I should see something different for my students. And that starts to build, a sense of efficacy, like, oh, hey, I did that, that actually worked. So I think that's one big thing. And the idea of like really getting teachers to set a personal goal for what am I trying to accomplish here. I think we're kind of wrestling with how do you lead teachers to that? So you're not saying plopping on top of them, go do this thing, because, and not, like you said, diminishing their profession, but helping them understand, like, there may be some things that are going on for your students that there is a practice tied back to that, but first getting teachers to identify their problem of practice, that kind of how do I do this better question. And that, there's a lot of wrestling with those things and how do we help teachers like use that 6 phases model of learning to see where is maybe learning breaking down for my students? Then what can I do about it? So I think I've learned so much just from you about sort of the clarity of thinking around, the notion of checklists and playbooks and all these things. And so it is already enhanced, I hope, what I'm delivering for teachers. So I'd be curious though, Jim, like from your perspective, what kinds of things have you been learning too?
Well, what I find, there's just broadly speaking what I've learned, and then there's the more specifics. Broadly speaking, I hadn't thought about, this is kind of almost embarrassing, but I hadn't really thought about thinking about how the teaching practices teachers learn line up with the phases of learning for students. That's an important thing to say. If kids need help with this phase of learning, what are the strategies to help us get there? Mm-hmm. And then getting into the nuts and bolts of it specifically, developing the checklist, the one-pagers, looking at the assessment tools, and just constantly wrestling with how do we make this work and, create, our way of putting it would be create the conditions for people to do good things, setting it up so they can set a goal and get there. We felt like we wanted to get a clear picture of reality, or at least a clearer picture of reality on the part of teachers. So you and I talked about, but you created this assessment tool where teachers could look at a video of their class or just reflect on their class, look at the 6 phases of learning and say, I need to focus my attention here. So do you mind saying a bit about those phases and then what it was like creating that assessment tool and where we are in that whole process?
Yeah, no, sure. So the 6 phases of learning, they come out of cognitive science, and this has been around for decades. And there's something called the information processing model, which is basically how do we take information stimuli from our environment and get it down to long-term memory. And so we use that, and we started thinking about the process of learning. And so I'll describe the 6 phases. I'm going to describe them in kind of a linear way, but we know that learning's messier than that. It's often very iterative. But the first phase of learning is becoming interested in something, and there's a reason for that. Our brains are designed to filter out most of the stimuli in our environment. So if we're going to learn anything, we have to first become interested, maybe curious about it. We see I have a need, I have an itch to scratch here. And then this part of it, we know learning is also a lot of mental effort. Our brains prefer not to expend effort. We want to power down all the time to low effort mode. So the second phase of learning is commit to learning. At some point, we have to tell our brains to stay switched on. And that's that second phase. And there's a lot of strategies tied to that. I won't go to those just yet. But then at some point, now we move into our short-term working memory. So that's where we are actively manipulating stimuli, thinking about stuff. But this is also where we're looking at our environment. We're paying attention to things. So we're looking at things. There's visual learning. There's verbal learning. We actually know it works best if you do the two together. So the third phase of learning is focus on new knowledge. A lot of strategies tied to that. How do we help kids focus? And we hear teachers saying all the time right now, it feels like their attention is shattered. So this is becoming a bigger challenge, even though it's kind of bread and butter teaching and learning. Focus on new knowledge is the third phase. We know there's a mental process called consolidation. So as we get those initial memory traces, they're called, we have to start to connect dots, put things together, arrange things in our minds, not in filing cabinets, but usually elaborate neural networks. So that's the fourth phase of learning, is make sense of learning. I've learned something, maybe I have to talk to a peer about it. I have to process my learning. But to get to long-term memory, we have to go, there's 2 more phases here. The 5th phase is practice and reflect. And that's quite simple. Cognitive science has been clear that the only way we really learn something is through repetition. We have a natural forgetting curve in our brains. So we have to come back to new information repeatedly over time, over actually weeks, before we really get something to stick, because our brains are always trying to prune useless knowledge out. And so until we come back to knowledge, our brains will automatically prune that. But then with the 6th phase of learning gets at this issue of how do we really learn things deeply when we've taken them and applied them, come back to that new learning in multiple ways, and like not just multiple times, but multiple ways. And we've done something with our learning. sort of through a hands-on, minds-on activity. So the sixth phase of learning is extend and apply. And so when we lay all those out, it's like, oh, that's a lot like teacher learning as well. It's adult learning, and it's pretty much a universal design of learning, right? Our brains pretty much all work the same way. Yes, there are cultural differences to those six phases, but it goes back to decades of cognitive science about how people's brains work wherever we're located.
So this is what I'm grateful for, because having those phases of learning, we're able to have a teacher sit down and share an assessment tool so they can look at where their kids are in those phases of learning and then set goals to identify, of the 14 high impact teaching strategies you've identified, they can see if any of those strategies would help them address what the goal is. They may have other things too, but we can start with what's there. Would you be kind enough to talk about the assessment tool you've created? What's it been like creating that tool? And we're just starting to do beta testing, but what's been your experience with that?
Well, this is where I'm grateful for our collaboration, Jim, because we'd always thought like, hey, those 6 phases of learning, that's kind of a diagnostic of learning, but we haven't gone to the more precise level of like, but how would I diagnose that? So we're thinking, for example, in that first phase of learning, that's where teachers could start to ask questions like, how engaged are my students? Like, there's cognitive engagement, there's behavioral engagement. Like sometimes we think if they're sitting silently and nodding along that they're engaged, but like, are they really interested? Are they curious about their learning? And so we've got a series of questions that kind of get at that. How much interest are my students demonstrating in their learning? So, and then we ask the next set of questions around how committed are they? Do I see them? Do they have a goal for learning? Do they know what they're learning, why they're learning it? Do they have a way of tracking their progress? And we know this is powerful. We've seen kids that truly set goals. And, I was at a school in Australia where the kids, this is how they were doing goal setting. On the back of their lanyards, their security pass was their goal for the week, right? So the kids were that clear about their goals. And so we have a series of questions that teachers can start to ask, like, are my students truly bought in to their learning? And so is kind of sizing up there. We have questions around sort of their focus. Do they seem to pay attention in class? Are they processing information that's around focusing on new knowledge? Do they use the vocabulary that we want them using? Do they demonstrate that they've taken these packets of information, turned them into words? So we've got questions that kind of get at the how able are they to focus. And part of it, so just the whole process is like, if my kids aren't learning and they're not mastering their learning, where is it breaking down? Are they not on board in the first place? They haven't set goals, or is it in this focus phase? Or do I hear? And then we have a series of questions around: do I think my students are actively thinking about their learning? Daniel Willingham makes the point: students only learn what they think about. So, like, do I see visible learning, like John Hattie talks about? Our kids, how do I know if they're making connections and processing their learning, making sense of it? So we've got questions around that. We've got questions around like, how do I know? Okay, once they start practicing learning, do I see them developing more and more automaticity? Do I see them getting to a point where they can also reflect on their gaps and then close those gaps? And then I think that the deeper questions are all around like, are they getting to extension, application? Do I see them able to take the information they learn and come back and maybe create something new with it? And I think along all of those dimensions, we're saying there are things that you're just observing in classrooms. So somebody else, peer could come into your classroom and say, like, do I see these things happening? There's also ways that you can use your regular classroom assessments to see what kind of progress is being made. So we've just developed this instrument. It's freely available. So, folks after the podcast, they can reach out to us. We're happy to share, because we're wanting to get at, does it help teachers maybe see where's the process of learning breaking down for my students, or where's it going really well? Like, also, it's good to know your bright spots too. But then what can I build on? What are my opportunities?
Well, I love being a part of the process, and maybe I'll just say a couple of things, and then we'll talk about some of the other things along the way. But let me ask you this: does anything stand out as something you've really learned from developing this assessment tool in this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a big whiteboard session, right, going through all the strategies. That was really helpful. Also, here you're thinking about what are the simple things that we can do to track engagement, for example, that doesn't have to be an elaborate, a survey, even just like after class from fist to five, fist being I'm not interested to five really interested. Those simple things. I think the insights just into, how can I as a teacher, without having to stop everything I'm doing, maybe this is the insight. We think about assessing learning as only happening on a test, right? Or a quiz or something, but I can also be assessing the process of learning. And maybe that's the big aha for me, like, oh, we can help teachers assess the process of learning. So not waiting until the very end, quote unquote end of some kind of classroom assessment. But before we get to there, how can I size up what's happening? So I think those are some of the ahas. A lot of the strategies that I know the things we've thought about that teachers can do right there in the classroom in real time, right? That you don't have to wait. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there insight? I'd be curious, Jim, to like what things that were kind of
So let me sort of say a few things and then come back to that. So I'm working on a paper right now for educational leadership on myths of educational change, and I might change the name by the time it comes out, but it'll be done soon because it's due next week. And one of the things that I say is kind of a myth is that we can show up and do a workshop and say research has been done and this is something you need to do, and then teachers will take it and they'll use it.
Right.
And we just think that doesn't usually happen. You don't get
right.
One of the things is people start to forget what they've learned before they've left the workshop, but give them a few days, most of it's gone. But the bigger issue is that idea of starting with the research, teaching a coach teaches the teacher, teacher takes it to the students. We just, in our experience, and there may be people who've had different experiences, but that's how I started too.
Yeah,
I would go say, I work at the Center for Research on Learning at the University of Kansas. Millions of dollars has been spent on these practices, content enhancement or learning strategies. I'm going to teach you how to do it, then you can do it with your kids. And we just found people didn't sustain implementation. Yeah. So now we start with the kids. Now we say, okay, what do the kids need? And that's why your tool is so helpful, because it helps us with a fair bit of precision to say, this is where they're struggling, this is where they're succeeding. And that gives us a starting point to get into the strategy. So we start with the students, and then the teacher looks at it, and then the coach works with the teacher to identify strategy. The research is just as important.
Yeah.
No less important in the second, starting with the kids. It's just that we ground our research in the specific needs of the students. And you could have a teacher go to 3 days of workshops on something they absolutely have no use for. So that the first thing. We focus on you giving us some tools for getting more precise with our focus. But the second thing I'd say is without a clear picture of current reality, the person's not going to be that motivated.
Right.
I have to see, like right now, I'm trying to eat more healthily. This is kind of like, you go back over the 100 podcasts we've done, I probably said this like 50 times. Yeah. But nonetheless, maybe I need a better coach. But because right now I'm coaching myself. But I just had some tests that were not really as good as I would have liked them to be. And looking at the numbers, I'm like, I've got to change this. So I'm reading all about longevity and health span as well as lifespan. But I was motivated by seeing reality clearly. And the same thing can happen in any kind of change. It doesn't have to be teachers. When people look at change, when they see reality, it helps them do the right thing, but it also motivates them. Then once you've got reality, then you can set a goal. Then how am I going to get to the goal? And then the next part of the impact cycle, the identify stage, is where I am, where I want to get to, how I'm going to get there. Then once we know the strategy, probably choosing from the 14 strategies you identified that have enormous amount of evidence to support them, then we say, okay, let's learn that strategy and implement it. And that's where we started to create the playbook component of our work.
Yeah.
So we can churn research. Now, actually, your book is really good at making it pretty actionable already, but we're trying to make it even more actionable and accessible through one-pagers and checklists. So what's it been like creating the one-pagers and checklists?
That's stretched my brain quite a bit too, because I think it's also getting to this very practical. What is the step-by-step process I would use to help students set goals, for example, right?
Right.
And then what might I reflect on as a teacher? And also, I think getting at some of the why parts of that, again, articulating. That was also why we were excited about the pairing of the science of learning with the science of teaching, because we want teachers to understand why they're doing the things they're doing. Because I also think that helps make things stick. I mean, as you were talking, Jim,
Right.
you reminded me of Mary Bud Rowe. You know, she basically came up with the idea of wait time. It was something she'd observed, and so she came out to teachers saying, "Hey, after you ask a question, wait 3 seconds, and then wait 3 seconds after students respond." I mean, that's the strategy. There's nothing more complicated than that. And she found that teachers could kind of pick that up and start to use that, but she'd find like after 6 to 8 weeks, they'd slide back to old habits, right? And that's where they needed a coach or somebody maybe to remind them of what the practice looks like. I also think what's really important there is to help teachers understand, why am I doing wait time? Well, it's because I want my students thinking about their learning. And so anyway, I think the process of creating the playbooks, back to that, has helped me think about like, what does it look like when students or when teachers are doing this? And then what does it look like for students? That's also really powerful. Why is this important for students? And we talk about the research, like, hey, these have big effect sizes, but I think in the end, it's not going to matter for teachers until they see the effect size for their own students, right? That's, you kind of remind me of something else too. There's a book years ago that I still reference all the time called Change or Die.
Yeah.
Alan Deutschman wrote this book, kind of getting a little bit your point that like, even though when we know factually that this is what I should do, most people don't change their practice. He talks about people having a heart attack. The doctor says, hey, if you don't change your practices, your eating habits, your exercise, all those things, you're going to end up back in the ER or worse, 6 feet under. And so you think that'll make people change their practices. And the reality helps, but it's not until you have a coach or somebody who can help you reframe a bit, like, it's not what you're giving up, it's what you're gaining, right? That if you change your, lifestyle, you'll feel healthier, you're going to wake up in the morning ready to go, all those things. But then also helping you kind of see the changes that are happening and kind of celebrate those. And so we do need a coach to change our practice. We've thought, at McGraw for a long time, that the way to change schools and school systems is from the inside out. So here's what I think I'm really excited about with the playbooks. We're getting right down to the very inside of what teachers are thinking about. And that's how you can truly change school systems, is basically one teacher at a time. But anyway, the playbooks have, I think, for me, made me even, I feel like it's a focus knob, on this, like getting sharper and sharper image of what this needs to be in a classroom. And we also know one of our strategies that people need it to be clear and concrete. If I can have a vicarious experience or truly know what you're talking about, then I can see myself doing that. And then I can actually implement in the classroom with the supportive coach, all those things.
Yeah, I would say leaving it up to the teacher to figure it out isn't a very
right. No,
we'll say, goal setting is really important. Go figure it out. So the more, not that we would say it has to be done this way, the teacher should be engaged in making it work for their particular students. One goal setting in one class might be different than goal setting in a different class.
Yeah.
And then other techniques may or may not work depending on your population. So they're going to have to modify it to make it work for them. But the thing is, I don't want the standard of excellence to be, you did everything on the checklist. I want the standard of excellence to be a change in students.
Yeah.
And so starting by saying, where are my kids with respect to learning, then setting a student-focused goal, then identifying a strategy. And let's say the kids are not responding, they're not giving very good responses to questions. I want to improve the quality of responses or higher level responses. And the teacher says, well, maybe I'll do wait time. I've read about that, heard about that. And if they use wait time and it helps them hit their goal, they'll keep using it.
Right.
That's the why part is I want to make it so, and I'm sure this fits into the 6 phases of learning. It becomes compelling and it stays with us when we see the results. And that's part of the reason why that goal. But then the playbook, it's made up of checklists for the strategies, 1-pagers to summarize the research and the importance. The playbook becomes, this is how we'll make it easier for you to implement. We're not minimizing the struggle it's going to be. We just want to make it actionable, and the teacher's involved in modifying it if they need to. But instead of having to read a book and figure it all out, and we're gonna pin it down. Now, I was wondering back a while back, as we're talking about this, I'm gonna put something out there and see what you think. What I'm gonna put out there is that workshops are good for awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't really lead to change.
Yeah.
And that usually if you went back and followed up after a workshop 6 months later, most of the people who went to the workshop, even if they loved it, they're probably not going to implement.
Right.
So what is this? If that's true, if you agree, I don't know if you agree or not, but if that's true, but that's not to say workshops are a bad idea. You have to have awareness. I think in many ways, I see us being able to give a big sort of broad school-wide vision of what you could do. Here are the strategies. Here's how students learn. And now let's zone in on the things you want to do for coaching. I think you can do both, and the workshops can lay that out. But generally, I would say it doesn't lead to sustained, deep change to go to a workshop. And I'm wondering what the 6 phases of learning would say about that. Is that in light of what you know there?
No, I think that's true. I mean, I guess I think about workshops. So if I go back to those 6 phases of learning, they're really like the 3rd and 4th phase. It's when I focus on the new knowledge and I maybe make sense of it. That's probably about all you can accomplish in a workshop. Maybe I can set a goal too, but hopefully I'm coming in, or if a good workshop facilitator can maybe help me get to a goal. But at the same time, though, what are in those 6 phases of learning, there are a lot of the strategies under focus on new knowledge that are a lot like direct instruction. The idea of like a strategy, instruction, modeling. I'm going to show you how to do this process, right? So Tom Guskey has also said, like, workshops are not the poster child of bad practice we make them out to be. They're necessary but not sufficient. It's hard, I think. I mean, there's an efficiency just like to a workshop, just like there's an efficiency to some direct instruction. But we know that if all you're doing is just lecturing at kids, it's not going to stick. So then I think about the 5th and 6th phase is where the coach comes in to say, I'm going to practice this. Maybe my coach can also help me if I start to slide back, or, teachers will do a lot of times, like, I asked high-level questions and I got crickets, so I'm never doing that again, right? Well, that's where a coach can say, no, maybe the students weren't quite ready for it, so you're going to scaffold into those higher-level questions or whatever it might be. So I guess I see workshops in that 3rd and 4th phase, and the coach might help with the 1st and 2nd phase of, like, what is your need here? What are you curious about? How do I do this better for my students? That's my curiosity. I'm going to set a goal, and then the coach is part of that. So the challenge is always, I know, for school systems, like they recognize that my teachers are at very different levels. How do I support all of them? And yet trying to have every single teacher on a personalized learning path is difficult. And also, I think sometimes people worry, like, do I know that they're all on a positive, really productive path? And so I think that's where our collaboration is to say, well, here are 14 pathways, if you will, 14 strategies that are really powerful, so that, even if teachers may be working on different things, it's all the right stuff that will lead up to something bigger too. So I guess I'd be also curious what your thought is about how do workshops, as you see the impact cycle, where do they fit in with that?
Well, I'm probably not as optimistic as Tom Guskey, but I have an enormous respect for him, and if he says it, I have to think about it pretty carefully. I would say workshops are awareness. They're we're going to be talking about our workshop here in just a minute.
Right. So yeah.
But I think workshops can get you started. Workshops can provide a big picture. So, for example, the institute we're going to do, the 4-day institute, we'll be able to say, here are the tools, here's how you use them, here's how it fits into the impact cycle, here are some of the communication skills and so forth. And I think that conversation is really, really important.
Yeah.
But you almost have to walk away. And the good thing too about our institute is probably the people who come will be interested and they'll be motivated. Mm-hmm. So they've already taken through the first 2 phases.
Right. Yeah.
And we'll give them a chance to practice and hopefully make some connections and put the pieces. But they're going to have to walk away with a plan of, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But I think to just have people pick up a book and try to do it, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be much more helpful to have sort of, for lack of better terms, experts saying, this is how we see it working. This is what you're going to do. You're going to take it and run with it. So,
yeah.
But I do feel that without coaching or some kind of follow-up, it's hard to implement it, that it's probably not going to pull it off. And we should probably talk about that. So we were doing this workshop February 3rd, February 6th, Iowa State playing Allen Fieldhouse, the greatest basketball stadium in the world.
My hometown team playing against yours.
Yeah, Iowa State playing against my American hometown team. Yeah, University of Kansas. The home place of James Naismith is
exactly, the inventor of basketball. Right.
I'll show you the rules that were developed by him there in Kansas. But anyway, we better get back on track. Iowa State's probably going to humiliate us in that game. Um, what are you looking forward to in the institute? We're going to do February 3rd to 6th in Lawrence.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this really melding of the impact cycle with the 14 strategies. I've described it at times as like it's the chocolate and peanut butter of the Reese's peanut butter cup, right? The things come together. I think maybe also I thought about workshops differently, honestly, since we've begun our collaboration. I think part of what you're doing in a workshop, it is like saying, here are some powerful strategies and giving people some options. Because we've also said we don't want the wrong thing for anyone to do would be to say, I'm going to run out and do all 14 of these strategies. So I think it's kind of the autonomy, mastery, and purpose that Dan Pink talks about. We'll be saying, here are some really powerful strategies. Here's how you would coach somebody using the impact cycle to implement those strategies. And then my image is that people would leave the workshop saying, okay, I've got some tools in my toolkit. As I go help teachers, I can help them figure out what is their biggest problem in practice that has a solution to it. Keeping the focus on their own teaching practices. How can I help students? So that's kind of my image that folks would walk away feeling equipped. And there's a lot of learning, and there's probably always a spiral curriculum that we have to keep coming back to learning. But that's my image, Jim. I don't know about yours, or what your hopes are for folks.
Well, I think they're going to get a lot of really valuable tools. So they'll get the assessment tool. We'll walk through how to use it. We might even practice it. They're going to get the playbook that's been developed. We'll give them the checklist and the one-pagers for each of the 14 strategies. Then those two things, I guess that's probably the peanut butter. I don't know what's the peanut butter and what's the chocolate, but anyway, those two things fit into the broader context of coaching. And we look at that from different ways, but one way of thinking about coaching is there's a set of beliefs that guide your practice. Where you come from, philosophically, your way of being is going to shape how likely people are to work with you. There's a set of communication skills we use as coaches, mostly listening and questioning and explaining clearly but dialogically what has to happen. Then there's a coaching cycle, and that's the impact cycle. And then there's the fourth circle. If you visualize this as a Venn diagram, the fourth circle would be strategic knowledge. Well, the strategic knowledge is the work you're doing. And we're going to take that strategic knowledge, give people all these valuable tools, and then help them put it into the impact cycle. And I think from the coaching perspective, a lot of people will say to me, well, what's next after we do your institute? Or what's next after we go through the virtual institute? Well, the next part for me is let's take a rigorous, high-quality curriculum of effective teaching practices. Maybe curriculum's not the right word, but let's look at what research says are the most effective teaching practices and then figure out how to embed that into a coaching cycle that starts with kids and then starts with teachers. That's what excites me.
Yeah, you and I talked, Jim, about the other exciting thing for me is that I think this could be a better way to go about school improvement than what we typically do, right? We have these big school improvement plans with 42 things we're all trying to accomplish, and we do too many things. We're trying to do too many things and accomplish too little. And the history of school improvement is littered with examples of like failed efforts, right? And school improvement itself hasn't been all that effective in changing student outcomes. And so I think there's something that comes out of this too, to maybe be a different model for school improvement that starts truly from the inside out with each teacher. We know that the number one thing schools can do to improve student outcomes is improve the quality of teaching and learning happening in classrooms. So that's, I think, as almost like, where does it go? As teachers were saying, or coaches were saying, what happens after I learn the impact cycle? It's like, this is a way to truly transform, I think, learning experiences for kids. And that's what we're all trying to do here. So there's a lot more, I think, to come. That's as I think about where the collaboration goes in the future, that idea of providing kind of a roadmap for school improvement that reflects all the things we've talked, the truly inside out, getting teachers bought in, building their efficacy, all that. So I don't know how you thought about where stuff goes after this, but.
Well, I agree with that. I think that's such a good point that I've probably been too biased on let's kind of just figure it out as we go, and let's start with each teacher, and everybody does their own journey. And naturally, people have said, well, we need a shared understanding of what we're trying to do. We need a school-wide understanding of what we're going to work. But our model brings the two together. So we're able to say, well, here's a school-wide vision, and here's how we embed it in doing something that's best for kids as a starting point. So we can do both things together, big picture and then almost micro level change. And the good thing about the impact cycle is we've built in a system for measuring its effectiveness. if we set student-focused goals and we hit those student-focused goals, we're making a difference. And that to me is really, really powerful. We're going to give people tools for doing that.
Right. I think a lot of this process also, it honors teachers and it honors local context, because that's a lot of, like I mentioned, we do work all over the world, and we're working in places like Guam and the Micronesia, where we're actually the same 6-phase model applies there. But the magic is folks there saying, okay, but for my students, here's how I'm going to help them set goals, right? It may look different depending on,
Right.
context, all that. So I think this is also, it's dignifying the profession too, by saying, we're going to give you some powerful, important things, strategies, but then the teachers and their coaches and the school leaders, they come together to say, what does this look like in our context too? So I'm really excited about that idea.
Yeah, I could keep going. The idea of priorities, focused attention. There's so much.
Right.
Great. We'll pick it up when we get together in February, and I'm hoping that the book is available at our TLC in October, and I want to talk to you about how we can share that. Hopefully we'll have you at TLC. So
I'd love to be there. Yeah.
Excited about lots of different things. But Thank you so much, Bryan. It's always a pleasure. Best thing about this project is getting to work with you, so I'm so grateful for it.
Well, not all the gratitude on this side, I'm sure, but it's been great working with you, and I feel like I have grown, learned so much as a professional just from the collaboration too.
Me too. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.